Shalom, I'm Dr. Dinah Dye with Foundations in Torah, working with HRN, and we are doing a series on the Rapture. It's called Rapture or Bust. And I've been going through explaining the various elements, how did we get here, where this doctrine came from, is it applicable, where did we see it in Scripture, or do we see it in Scripture? And last week I kind of ended with quite a few verses from the book of Enoch itself. Now, the book of Enoch is basically said to have been written by the great-grandfather of Noah, which was Enoch, Hanok, and we were talking about him in a little more detail. My premise is that Enoch, Hanok, who was the seventh generation from Adam, is really a picture of Yeshua in his first coming. So it talked about Enoch, Hanok, walk with God twice. We see it inserted in that very little information that we have, and then he was no more. And that his name backwards is a man like Noah. So we have a relationship, not only blood relationship, but a spiritual relationship between Enoch and Noah. And you can see how those two names sound the same. So in the book of Enoch, there's some very interesting information that I think will help enlighten us about this whole, this concept really of the resurrection of the dead, when it'll take place, but really the work of Yeshua the Messiah. So as I said, Hanok, Enoch, there's not very much information in Scripture about him. We do have a quote in Hebrews and one in Jude, but he is the one who would come the first time, as Yeshua did, to kind of prepare the way and provide atonement. And then he would be no more because he would be resurrected from the dead. And then the final generation, as we go through the whole list of the generations from Adam to Noah, the 10th generation, the last generation then, is Noah. And all the elements of the generation of Noah are going to be seen then in as it was presently, as it was in Matthew 24, as it was in the days of Noah. And so I'm trying to show you that whole connection. So I'm going to back up and read just a couple of slides that I finished off with last time so we can have a little bit of context. Again, bear in mind as I'm reading these that I'm trying to make the connection then between Enoch, Hanok, and Yeshua the Messiah. So it says, they will pray and supplicate evermore. This is from the book of Enoch. But never shall they attain to mercy or peace. After Enoch had lived a long time secluded from men, he once heard the voice of an angel calling to him, Hanok, Hanok, make thyself ready and leave the house and the secret place wherein thou hast kept thyself hidden, and assume dominion over men to teach them the ways in which they shall walk. Can you see the connection there? Leaving the house, the secret place, what we might say the temple in heaven, the place of the presence of God where he has been kept away, hidden. And now he will assume dominion over men to teach them the ways that they shall walk. I mean, I don't think it could sound much more like Yeshua the Messiah. And it goes on to say, and the deeds which they shall do, in order that they may walk in the ways of God. So this is what Enoch is going to teach them. So Enoch, Hanok, left his retreat, and he betook himself to the haunts of men. He gathered them about him and instructed them in the conduct pleasing to God. He sent messengers all over to announce, ye who desire to know the ways of God and righteous conduct, come ye to Enoch. Does that not sound like the Messiah? Thereupon a vast concourse of people thronged about him. Doesn't that sound like Yeshua? To hear the wisdom he would teach and learn from his mouth what is good and right. So, I mean, exactly like what the Messiah accomplished. And we go to the next quote here from the book of Enoch. Even kings and princes, no less than 130 in number, assembled about him and submitted themselves to his dominion to be taught and guided by him, as he taught and guided others. And we have another quote here. The impression made by the teachings of Hanok upon all who heard them was powerful. They prostrated themselves before him and cried, long live the king, long live the king. There's the connection to me is undeniable. And we're going to continue on. I've got just a few more quotes here from the book of Enoch. On a certain day, while Hanoch was giving audience to his followers, an angel appeared and made known unto him that God had resolved to install him as king over the angels in heaven, as until then he had reigned over men. And we go on. He called together all the inhabitants of the earth and addressed them thus: I have been summoned to ascend into heaven, and I know not on what day I shall go thither. Therefore I will teach you wisdom and righteousness before I go hence. Now, if I think that this really is a reference then to Matthew 24:36. No one knows the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven, and not the Son, but only the Father. For the Son of Man's coming will be just like it was in the days of Noah. And Enoch is sort of a picture to prepare for that coming for the 10th generation. And if you think about it, Enoch was the 7th generation, Noah was the 10th, so we actually have 2 generations in between, the 8th and 9th, which we could perhaps argue signify the 2 days or the 2,000 years between Yeshua's first coming and his second coming. Just a little food for thought there. And I have another quote here that it says, a few days yet Enoch spent among men, and all the time left to him he gave instruction in wisdom and knowledge, God-fearing conduct and piety, and established law and order for the regulation of the affairs of men. So there really is quite a bit of information from the first book of Enoch relating to what Enoch accomplished, even though there's really nothing in the Torah. There's like 3 verses. So how is it that all this came out from that? So again, I associate the 2 together. And it ends, of course, in the chapter there in Genesis chapter 5 that he was no more, that God took him and he was no more. And really, I can't think of another. He is the example, Enoch, of the one, and Yeshua, the one that God took, who was no more. So that the question of what became of Enoch, Hanoch, of course, puzzled later generations. The third century translators, the ones who were responsible for the Septuagint, rendered the phrase God took him, meaning moving him from one place to another. Again, I see Yeshua as sort of moving from the sphere of earth to heaven, moving from what we call this present age, the Olam Hazeh, to the world outside of time, we call paradise, the Olam Haba, or however. But this isn't anything to do with the secret rapture, because in all honesty, we now live in this present age subject to the laws of nature, but when we are resurrected, we will enter into the Olam Haba, the world to come, which at present is the place where Yeshua resides, if you will. So anyways, that kind of completes that sort of portion there. And we are going to, we're talking about Enoch, and we're going to move now into more details then about the B'nai Elohim. I sort of started that in our last session, just mentioning the concept of the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, and the idea of the daughters of men, and hopefully shoot holes in the theory that we've always had. Now, of course, things can have multiple meanings, but I'm going to suggest this one because I'm a practical person. So now we move to the 8th generation, which we call, in English, Methuselah, actually is Metushalech, or Metushalach. And let's just read the passage there. It says, at the time of Methuselah, or Metushalach, following the death of Adam, the family of Seth became corrupted after the manner of the Cainites. Okay, so we know that the line of Cain was corrupt. And we know the line of Adam started out well. By the time we got to the 3rd generation, Enosh, it begins to be corrupted. And by the time we get to the 6th generation, Yared, or Jared, it's really descended into depravity. So the 2 strains united with each other to execute all kinds of iniquitous deeds. The result of the marriages between them were the Nephilim, whose sins brought the deluge upon the world. And let's go to the next slide. In their arrogance, they claimed the same pedigree as the posterity of Seth, and they compared themselves with princes and men of noble descent. So my premise is that Cain is the description is the daughters of men, the line of Cain, and the line of Adam through Shet and Enosh and on down here to Shalach are the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim. But the B'nai Elohim became corrupt by the time we got to the third generation. And now we're going to have an intermarrying between the line of Cain from Adam and the line of Seth through Adam. And the intermarrying of these two bring forth what we call Nephilim. Yes, it can be translated giants, but really means fallen ones. So the marriage between the two really puts the human race descending down into the pit, if you will. And I just see it in very practical terms, that this is intermarrying between these two lines that causes things to descend even further. And we're going to talk about this in a little more detail, but I want to go back to because we're working our way through the 10 generations. So after Enoch, Hanok, who was number 7, and we went to number 8, Methuselah, which actually could mean in his death he was sent out, something like that. We come to Lamech, he's number 9, and an anagram, if you will, for Lamech is Melech, which is king. And then we come to number 10, Noach, whose name means to bring comfort and rest, Hebrew Nach. And Noah's name is an anagram, chen, for favor. So all these words kind of work together and kind of in and out, et cetera, et cetera. So those are our 10 generations, and each one reflects kind of what's going on in that generation. Now let's just look at this passage here talking about the sons of God and the daughters of men. First we'll look at the Banot HaAdam, the daughters of men. It says, even during the lifetime of Adam, the descendants of Cain became exceedingly wicked, dying successively one after another, each more wicked than the former. They were intolerable in war and vehement in robberies, and if anyone were slow to murder, yet was he bold in his profligate behavior in acting unjustly and doing injury for gain. So this is a wonderful picture of what's happened to the daughters of men through the line of Cain. And we move on, Genesis 6:1, it's kind of interesting. It says that it came to pass, man began to rule. Okay, so now we kind of shifted. God's not ruling, man is ruling, and daughters were born to them. There's no mention here about sons being born to them, and just about daughters being born to them. So the concept here is, in Hebrew thinking, it was always the sons that would continue the seed of the house. In fact, if you took the word for son, ben, beit, nun, beit meaning house, nun meaning continuing seed, that's how a house continued. We're talking about a spiritual house or a house with a father, mother, producing children. So sons continue the family line, daughters do not. And so we come in here in Genesis 6:1, and we find that now that man begins to rule, there are just daughters being born and no sons. And I think that's significant. The omission of sons is significant. It is that daughters don't continue the family line. And now we have this mixing in the marriage of the sons of God and the daughters of men. And we have a mixing of the bloodline. So this marrying and giving in marriage is now forming a very corrupt, mixed seed. And so if only daughters are produced, then the line, the house, is not being built, because the house only grows through the sons. It is that the sons are the ones that build the house. And so what does it say? The sons of God, and I think we have a photo here of the enticing woman in marrying the man. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were good. Now that word good usually connects to something being beautiful. Think about Lucifer. He was beautiful. And they took for themselves wives from all that they chose. So there was sin in the family line. Sin in the daughters of men was further corrupting things, and that basically the line of Seth were marrying these women without considering their lineage. Their lineage was from the line of Cain, a line that had already descended into corruption on all levels. And so the Sethites had no business marrying the daughters of Cain. And so the line was basically, the seed was mixed. They were producing a seed that was evil. And it says that these marriages were enticed by the proponents of a godless, depraved culture, and then suffered the fate of the destruction with all of mankind. So this mixing of seed, if you will, between these two lines doesn't produce anything good. And that is one of the reasons why God has to completely destroy the earth. However, God found in one, and we have a picture here kind of the Nephilim, because yes, it could be giants, but I think it doesn't necessarily mean that. More like fallen ones who are the fruit of the marriage that comes forth from the daughters of men and the sons of God. But God found one who was righteous, who would continue to build the house. Remember, a house is built through sons. And so Noah was the one who would continue the building of the sons. It's interesting that he gets in the ark and there's no mention. I mean, we know he's got a wife and the sons have wives, but there's no mention of their names, because the key is the seed that will come forth from his sons, the one righteous ones that have been preserved in that generation. The Nephilim, I think the fallen ones and the ones who cause others to fall as well. They are, if you will, in the spirit and beauty of Lucifer. Basically, the line of Cain, it's as though the spiritual element of this mixing between these two lines has completely disappeared. So one theory on the concept of the giants is that the physicalness of them replaced the spiritual. So they were, in a sense, totally corrupt, depraved, diminished, but they were great as giants in the physical sense, but they were as midgets in the spiritual sense. So they were physically great, but spiritually fallen. They were diminished in the spirit, but they were great physically. They were physically dominant, if you will. So that it was that the spiritual essence, the spiritual power was subordinated to the physical. So the union of these two seeds from the line of Cain and the line of Shet that had both been diminished basically brought nothing but rebellion. It talks about the heroes of old, if you will. And again, this idea of their spirit being subservient to the physical. And this is certainly a danger that we have to, that we face as well, because the physical can be the dominant thing in our lives, and we can just push the spiritual aside, and it can become as like sort of the little man in us, where the physical sense is great. Verse 6:5 said, at this point the evil of man was great, the forceful actions of man. Man had brought great evil upon the world. So this is where we are at this time. And in speaking for the future, it says, every design of the thoughts of his heart was evil every day. It was a dark time. It says every ideal which that generation aspired to was totally devoid of good. Nothing good here. But our hope, and as it was in the days of Noah, so is it in the days now, that God will bring the redemption, the Geula, and he will change their fate. He is the only one that can. He's the only one that can change the seed. So when the seed when the seed changes, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, it changes because now they will be born from above instead of below. So they'll be born above from the Spirit. But something had to come and interact in between, to prevent the seed from continually decaying into Lord knows what. And so Noah is a picture of Yeshua, who came and the seed was then sort of altered and changed. As the seed for Messiah, that seed was planted in Miriam. That seed was the pure seed that came directly from God. And so we're seeing this kind of played out in the story of Noah. And so he takes with him the good seed on board the ark. However, it's really not enough. And we'll see that when the ark lands and they get off on the other side and the corruption starts all over again, doesn't it? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we have a picture here of the tree. The tree in the mix, in the garden, in the house, a tree of mixed fruit that produces mixed seed. It's kind of the perfect representation of what happens when you mix these two lines. So all these words, fruit and seed, really relate to families and producing children. That's really what it's all about. And so the mixed fruit on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the same sort of intermingling of evil and good. It doesn't really produce good. It produces evil, and it produces things that descend and are depraved and decay. One of the things that I have taught about this is that when Hava came to the tree, there's some idioms in there, and it says that she took and she ate. And although we have the physical sense of what it means, but spiritual, I'm making another application here. The idea that she took is really an idiom for taking a wife in marriage. And she ate is an idiom for the actual marriage. So you know, in an ancient Hebrew, even Middle Eastern custom, that first they would take a wife and then there'd be a period of time before they actually sealed the marriage and consummated the marriage. So in a sense, if we think of trees as people and Hava partaking of that fruit and eating of it, in a sense she's joined herself to this tree that represents the kingdoms of this world. And it is though she, in a sense, married the tree. She took and she ate. And so it's like the first case of adultery, if you will. And so she joined herself to the tree in an unholy alliance, and now the seed is in her, and the fruit that's produced out of her is a seed that decays. And so a seed has to come, a pure seed, to start the process all over again, so that what's produced is good fruit, good offspring. And so that's the picture with Noah. He sort of is a divine intervention, because these lines would have eventually ended up, who knows where, how decayed, and how far they have descended into depravity before God divinely intervened. That's really the key. So Noah, then a picture of what Yeshua would be. So again, we find that the wicked, the sons of God, and the daughters of men both end up being lines out of Adam that are decaying, and they marry and they produce only daughters. And it's that the sons would build the house. And you think about what Paul says. What fellowship has darkness with light? With Belial, and again in the context of fruit and the marriage, and like the sons of Eli and the sons of Benjamin, the wicked and evil among you. All these sort of images then of joining the evil and the wicked. Now this is something we have to deal with really in every generation. It says the disastrous results of a merger between the righteous line of Seth with the proponents of a godless culture whose progress ended in depravity. These are the disastrous results. Because of this, the descendants of Seth sunk as well. So they started out well, but then they joined themselves to the daughters of men, and they ended up sinking. It's not like they raised up the daughters of men, it's that they both went down with the ship. And basically they suffered the same doom, the same consequences that all mankind did, except for our man Noah. And so next time we're going to start in talking about Noah, but it was important to kind of lay the groundwork. And I know this may seem like we're really far from the rapture, but if we don't understand all these preliminary events with the story of Noah, we're not going to understand or see there is something in the story that shows us the resurrection, but there's nothing in the story that that's going to show us the rapture. And Noah remains the key to this whole thing. There's a reason that Matthew 24 talks about as in the days of Noah. It's critical. And when I was looking at it, I thought, well, if there is a rapture, I'm going to have to find it in this story. And so that's why I went back to look at everything preliminary, and I didn't find the rapture, but I did find the concept of the resurrection. But we have to see where everything ended up, and this relationship with the sons of God and the daughters of men. And I think really that particular explanation about the marriage between the two maybe seems simplistic, but really it makes a lot more sense than creating sort of these superhuman race of giants on the earth that marry angels and stuff. It's hard for me to accept that. But anyways, it's just my premise. And we'll pick it up next time, and we're going to go into the story of Noah in more detail. Shalom.